Hello, in this walkthrough video, we'll look at the essential components of Pattern Engine necessary to get started, beginning with installation. To install Pattern Engine, along with all the included presets, once you have unzipped the downloaded folder, you'll want to drag it to the user library in Live. You can find this in Live's browser Places, User Library. Inside the MFA Pattern Engine folder, you'll find a folder called Pattern Engine. I'll drag that into my Manifest Audio folder, which is contained within the user library. Putting it in the user library means it will be ingested for other browser search categories. If you have any issues loading the presets, you might be advised to take the Max MIDI Effect folder and copy it into the user library presets, MIDI effects, Max MIDI Effect here. Pattern Engine features 16 steps, which can be configured in a variety of ways. We'll get to the step controls momentarily. First, a quick tour of the interface. Here we have our global play controls. These control playback, the step grid size, in other words, the length of each step, different playback modes, including forward, reverse, circular, random, and swing amount. Here we have the global step controls for setting various step parameters in unison for all steps simultaneously. Below this, we have the global LFO controls. Pattern Engine features 4 LFOs that can be assigned to different steps in a variety of ways. Here we have the global randomization controls. Finally, this is the step control area and the global output settings here. The first thing I will do is select a scale. A simple minor scale will do. I can also change the key and transpose manually. But in receive mode, Pattern Engine will receive transposition data from any incoming MIDI. You can disable this by switching it to internal mode. Now, in order to focus on a single step, I will reduce the cycle length to 1. That means we will be focused on one simple step. I've got some basic drums just to orient us rhythmically. The step that's selected is lighter gray, and steps outside the cycle length appear dark gray. So now that I've selected one step, you'll see that I can change the pitch, and it stays within the selected scale and key. I can also mute the step, change the velocity, which will have a different impact depending on the instrument and how it's programmed. I can also change the length of this particular step, the note length, not the step length. And I can enable a monophonic tie, which will only be audible when other steps are playing. Now, if I switch this to chance mode, then I can randomize the pitch of this step. Whenever I click the dice randomization button. Now, if I want to exempt a step from randomization, I can set it back to manual mode. Likewise, I can randomize the mute. If I don't want the mute to be randomized, I can enable the lock. This is what the lock does for all of the step parameters, is it means that they can only be adjusted manually and are now exempted from any randomization that might come through otherwise. So now you can see the velocity is randomizing. Okay, so the final feature of the steps is to assign it to an LFO. Now, when I assign a step to an LFO, the corresponding LFO is automatically enabled, but I must assign a modulation amount in order for the LFO to take effect. So the motion is the distance the LFO will travel in controlling the pitch of that step. In the LFO area, I can choose different LFO shapes, adjust the rate, determine whether it's synchronized to the BPM or a free rate measured in hertz. I can also manually retrigger it or set it to retrigger with incoming MIDI. Now I can also move the motion in a negative direction, which means two steps assigned to the same LFO can be moving in opposite directions. I can also change the center value, which is going to effectively transpose the motion up or down. So as I move the center 2 octaves above C3, which is the default 0, you can see it going much higher. Double click to reset. So let's examine some of Pattern Engine's unique randomization controls. If I click this global dice button, it's going to randomize all of the parameters for all of the eligible steps, in other words, unlocked parameters, at once. So it will do this according to the different randomization amounts for the different parameters. So I can easily create new patterns within any scale and key. If I want certain steps to always be on, I can simply lock them. Now I can transpose the input from a MIDI clip. There's also a manual transposition, which works in tandem with the incoming received MIDI. If I no longer wish to be transposing, I can simply stop the clip. However, the transposition may remain at the pitch of the last received MIDI note. To reset this, I can switch to internal mode and back to receive. Now I can increase the randomization amount and adjust the different randomization ranges. So I can increase the range of note pitches that might be randomized to. I can change the velocity, and this global velocity changes the velocity of all steps simultaneously. I can also momentarily hold all steps into a tie. Now you might be wondering what these shuffle buttons do. These will enable auto-randomization for all eligible step parameters, in other words, unlocked step parameters and step pitches that are not in manual mode or assigned to an LFO, in other words, in chance, at an interval here in bars. So I can toggle all of these on at once here or set them manually one at a time. Now I've turned all of them on, so all of these step parameters will randomize every 2 bars. Now I might want the pitch to only randomize every 8 bars or every 4 bars. And maybe I'll set the hold to that 4 bars as well. And maybe I wish to transpose it all down 1 octave here. Now I could capture this by recording it all out to another MIDI track or an audio track, depending on the result I want and how to edit it. But if I want the sequence to be stored with a live set, I have to do a few things. If I want the auto-randomization to be stored with a live set, and I don't care particularly about any given set of notes, and I want the set to remember that I had auto-randomization enabled, I can leave it as is. But if I really like a particular sequence, that's been auto-randomized, I can just simply toggle out of it. And maybe an auto-randomized sequence requires a bit more tweaking. Maybe I need a few more steps to be on here. Now, I can of course still change the step pitch settings manually in chance mode, but you'll notice when I switch to manual mode, the dial goes black rather than this sort of grayed out indicator that these steps are subject to randomization and as such will not be stored with my live set. So I want a little movement here, so I'm going to assign this step to LFO 1, which of course I must induce a motion amount. So that step is kind of moving around nicely. And let's say I'm quite happy with this pattern and I want it to save with a live set. So then I must click the save icon here. What this does is it switches all non-LFO assigned steps to manual mode so they can be saved with a live set and simultaneously deactivates any auto-randomization that might have been turned on. This ensures that Pattern Engine's current state will be saved with your live set. This button here, the key, will unlock any currently locked steps. Finally, this reversion toggle will set all steps back to their default state, switching all steps on, all velocities to 100, and all pitches to C3. So it's kind of a clean slate, but it leaves global output and other settings intact. I think what I'll do now is set it to a 4-step sequence. And enable pitch randomization. Then what I must do is set all those steps to chance, which I can do here. And I'll increase the pitch randomization chance. And I think the range is a little too high, so I'll double click to reset these to the default range. Now, if I want to adjust the pitch randomization settings, I can click this advanced toggle, and it will do so for all steps that are set to chance. Currently, all of them are set to chance. Now, there are 3 algorithms available for steps set to chance. Luck is purely random. Drunk is for a random walk to neighboring step values. So now they're gonna kind of change to more similar neighboring values. Or you can set it to fluid mode. And this will set them all to a quantum fluid randomization mode that has a bit of lyrical quality to it. Now, each step can be set individually via this advanced toggle. You don't have to look at those, but if you want one step to be set to drunk and one step with a lower chance of randomization at a higher octave range and another set to a lower octave range, you can do that with these advanced randomization settings. So I'm going to close those out. I don't want to look at that anymore. And I'm going to turn off the auto-randomization. Now I've got a little bank of these 4 steps. So I'm going to set the cycle to 1. And now I can move through the steps. Now, that's not so fun, but it's an interesting little use case. So now I've got 4 steps, and I think I want to, actually, let's do a hemiola thing. I'll set it to 3 steps, but I want to reset it every bar. Now you can hear it restart at the beginning of the first bar. If I set the reset to 2, now it'll reset every second bar. And I can offset the relative start point, which might be difficult to detect with the 3-step cycle. So I'll set it to 4 here. And before I get into the offset, I just want to show something with the reset play functions over here. I can play and pause sequence with this toggle and manually rewind to the first step with this MIDI Maple button. But now the cycle is going to be off in relation to where that first step is. So if I want to reset it at the beginning of the next bar, I can click this reloop button. And now we're locked back in. So now that I've got that, let's say I want this step 2 to be the functional first step. So now I can increase the offset to 1. And now this step is lit up a little lighter gray, indicating that this is the relative start point due to the offset. Now I can move the entire 4-step cycle around by changing the start point, but these weren't randomized earlier because they were outside the initial cycle. So I'm going to set these 2 to manual to lock them in and just randomize those 2. And I can offset the start point again within that cycle. And these are all limited by the available steps in the current cycle. So let's go back here and I'll do a 5-step cycle. And I'll have it reset every 2 bars. And so we can get some quite hypnotic stuff going on. And I think what I'll do is enable auto-randomization every 4 bars. And I've got to set them all to chance again. And I'll have some mute randomization going along with that, making it a little more spacious. Let's get some tie randomization. I've got a nice monophonic patch on the wavetable with some glide. So this might induce some eventually. So now, as the mute randomization cycles through and we get these quite sparse patterns, you may begin to see the benefit of locking certain steps so they always stay on, to ensure there's always a certain degree of musicality and you don't just get a blank sequence of empty rests. Now, performatively, I can turn all steps that are off on with this button, and then if I press this button again, it turns all unlocked steps off. Again, locked steps are exempt from these toggles. This, I'll unlock these briefly to show the invert function. Okay, so now I've just got this one unlocked step that's on. I've turned the auto-randomization off, and now this is going to invert. So all steps that are on go off, and all steps that were off go on. So that can be quite useful for like storing almost like an inverted sequence. Okay, so that's pretty fun. Let's go back to a 16-step cycle. Now I'm going to change the grid size here. And it waits till the beginning of the next bar to change the grid size. So that ensures musical transitions even at the smallest intervals. So that's pretty fun. Now you may find, even though it's waiting for the beginning of the next bar, you might have to reloop to get things aligned if you care, or maybe it's going to sound good how it is. Of course, we have our playback modes. So we've got reverse, circular. So it's bouncing back and forth. And a random mode where it's going to select random steps within the allotted cycle amount. So steps outside the cycle are exempt from that randomization. So it's just choosing between those 5 steps now, some of which are off. Okay, so I'll go back to the forward mode. Of course, there's swing set by default to 16ths, and this would just turn swing off. So now I think it might be fun to look at some of the LFO parameters a little more in depth. So I'm just going to, again, select a 4-step cycle. And let's turn all of them on. And I'll assign them all to that one LFO. So I'm going to move this first step up. So those are going in the opposite direction, both from LFO 1. I'm going to move this one up an octave. So these are all assigned to the same LFO, but purely by virtue of having different modulation amounts, they're all creating a dynamic pattern. If I set them all to the same, let's take a listen to that. It should just be tracing the same contour. Yeah, not nearly so interesting. So there's kind of like a call and response within that contour. Now I can change the length. And I can sort of freeze the state by toggling the LFO off. And then when I turn the LFO back on, they pick back up at wherever that LFO cycle might be. Now I can switch to a free rate and bounce them around really fast. So I think what I want to do is I'll set them to a sawtooth going up, and I'll leave it in this free rate. And I'm going to turn the retrigger on and start playing. This transposer sequence. And with each new transposing note, the LFO cycle begins anew. So you can see them jumping there at the start of each bar. Okay, so we can do all sorts of fun things, but I think maybe a more common use of the LFO might be if I just set all these to chance. And actually, let's say I'm happy with this sequence. Let's set them all to manual. And I'm going to turn that whole randomization off. And they're still transposing up and down with that MIDI coming in. So just so that we can really hear what's going on with this next example, I'm gonna turn that transposition off. So we got a static sequence here, very static. I can make it less static by assigning one or more steps to an LFO. And so now I think I want to move that motion upward. And I think I will slow the rate down. So the first 3 steps remain static. The 4th step is controlled by that sawtooth LFO that's moving in an upward direction. And of course, I can transpose all of this together manually with this slider here. So let's just look at transposing these in real time. I'll simply enable the track for MIDI input. And now I can play notes on my MIDI keyboard. And transpose it up or down in a very performative way. And to reset it to the default value, all I need to do is hit a C3 again on my MIDI keyboard, or of course toggle in and out of internal mode to reset that. Now I can show some of the different MIDI playback modes with the record input enabled, so it will receive MIDI input. Gate mode is going to effectively stop playback right now. And we'll only hear these steps when I happen to press a note on my MIDI keyboard, which will also transpose it. So this becomes almost like an arpeggiator, but it's not resetting the cycle. So we'll look at the ARP mode later on. The side mode is the invert of that, which is useful when receiving MIDI from other tracks. If I hold down a MIDI note, it stops playback. And otherwise continues playing. So if it's not receiving any MIDI in, you won't detect any difference between side and free mode. Trig mode is great for creating classic analog percussion trigger style sequences, allowing you to program a very rhythmically intricate sequence, including transposition. But right now, I'll just put a few steps in here like so, and each of these will trigger the next step in the sequence. Now I might want to increase the cycle here. So I could program a rhythmic sequence that effectively extends the length of the sequence here. Now I'll switch to back mode. And each of these are now re-triggering the sequence from its start. So I'll press stop on that clip. And now whenever I press a key on my MIDI keyboard, I can re-trigger the sequence and simultaneously transpose it, which again is almost like an arpeggiator. But for proper arpeggiator playback, I'm going to switch to ARP mode, which mutes it unless I play a note, at which point transposes it and resets it from the beginning. And so you can have a lot of fun playing with these different modes. They add a lot of power and utility to Pattern Engine. So again, if you want to save a pattern with your set, click the save button. But I think it would be useful to show some of the power of recording Pattern Engine output as MIDI. So I will insert a MIDI track and set it to receive MIDI from this wavetable track. Post MIDI effects. Yes, I want to receive the MIDI out of Pattern Engine. And as I enabled it to record, we can see it's got the MIDI, it's receiving the MIDI. So I think I'll start recording. I do an empty clip slot, and there's our basic 8-step sequence. And I think maybe it would be fun to enable some auto-randomization. And maybe by command click the record enable, I can do some real-time transposition. And now, of course, I've got all of that performance captured as MIDI, which I can then go ahead and edit as I might wish. So I'll fold it to a scale. The scale is C minor, and there's all the notes, and I can move them around and edit them and ultimately play them back through any other instrument that I might wish. I could also record the output from wavetable as audio with slightly less flexibility. I'll just quickly show how that works. So that's a nice little sequence I think we got there, right? So I'm going to stop that, and I can just pause the pattern engine. And here we've got the sequence that I liked, which I think was those two bars. Now it's rather quiet, might gain it up. And hopefully you're starting to get a sense of the limitless potential of how you might combine all the different features of Pattern Engine to create new ideas on the fly. Feel free to experiment with the different scales and keys, the different transposition input modes. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with multiple LFOs. Of course, it's a MIDI effect, so we need to send it to an instrument. And if you have external hardware, you can send it to Live's external instrument device and power any analog or other outboard gear with Pattern Engine as well. You can also experiment with using it on drums. There's really no end to the things you can do with it. So with auto-randomization enabled for all steps, I'm unable to automate them. Right-clicking on any auto-randomizing parameter yields nothing. It simply changes the parameter. If I disable, for example, on velocity, the auto-randomization now, these are all available for MIDI mapping. And if I had a clip selected, automation as well. Same goes for the step pitches, obviously. So then I get the MIDI map dialog, which would show automation as well in the arrange view. So if I want to allow automation of an auto-randomizing parameter step so that it no longer is randomizing and I'm actually controlling it, I can simply lock that parameter, and in doing so, look at that, I have the dialog available now, and those steps are not only exempt from the auto-randomization, but now I can control them, map them to MIDI, or automate them as well. One last final note is that all of the parameters in Pattern Engine are info view annotated. So if you are ever looking for clarification, of course, we've got an in-depth user manual and guide, but you can always open Live's info view and get hints on any of the controls in Pattern Engine by simply hovering the mouse over them. So I hope this has been informative and given you some idea of the potential of Pattern Engine. If you want to explore some more recipes, check out the presets that come with the device. So thanks for watching and happy patterning.